Hey, everybody, welcome back to Choose Inclusion. This is UV, and I'm here with Mike. Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm doing okay. This is a tough week for us here in the Denver metro area. However, obviously, our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims in Boulder, Colorado, and but I'm excited for our guest today. This is going to be a super interesting conversation in an industry that, quite honestly, from a naive perspective, I didn't realize, again, didn't have representation. So I'm super excited for our guest today, Ubaldo.
Yeah, I agree. And just a quick note, so Nina, who lives in Boulder, um, was very close to the shooting. So she is not joining us today. She's taking care of herself, which is extremely important. Um, so yes, want to introduce Jimi Vaughn. So Jimi, we were lucky enough to get introduced to Jimi a few months ago. He's the VP of Diversity and Engagement at Company 3, which is a VFX and traditional post-production company in the entertainment industry. So, hey, Jimi. Well, first of all, how are you?
You know what? I'm doing well, and but I have to kind of reflect and send back the same sentiment that Mike just expressed for the victims, families, and loved ones of those in Boulder, Colorado, and also to Nina as well. I'm glad that she's being able to take that moment to care for herself and to take care of her energy, because that's something that is incredibly important to me, that I talk about, like, quite a bit, especially as we talk about work within diversity, equity, and inclusion, which can be uniquely taxing, because it's everything is about one's identity, oneself, and the inner, like, just the emotional kind of experience that really can be. So I can say that I don't have, much to complain about as far as like how I'm doing, but I am very much so, kind of like in tune to what's going on just like around the world, and sharing and some of that experience with people.
Well, Jimmy, you're again just I've got so many naive questions, right? So, but it all comes from the blind guy lens. So please, please know that I guess I just didn't realize that TV shows and movies and stuff. Um, like I assume, I've been told that Will Smith is black. He's African American. I've been told Denzel Washington, right? But so again in my brain, like I'm thinking, oh well, there's representation, right? But um, I mean, our pre podcast conversation. So you're like, okay, but a role versus how many other roles, and then the interesting thing behind the scenes, behind the camera. So can we dive into, like, the true diversity and inclusion within the entertainment industry? Can you give me kind of a education 101 on entertainment?
Absolutely. So, for those who are listening who may not know, like, my current role is as a VP of diversity and engagement at a post-production company. But prior to that, for maybe about 10 years or so, I worked primarily in film and television on the production side of things. So I very much so started off as an actor, and then quickly realized that, like, oh, I like having a little bit more control over my own career. So as opposed to being told who to be, what to be, how to be, that actors typically go through. And I ended up going behind the scenes and being, more in the kind of like production route. And then ultimately, as the first assistant director, who's the person that's kind of in charge of navigating, like, the different areas of like the set. So that person controls the set, like who's got access to the set, who doesn't, production schedules, all that kind of stuff. And so that's what I did for a number of years before, shifting over, more to a little bit more of the corporate side of things. But to talk specifically about, diversity, equity, and inclusion in entertainment, it's pretty unique, because it's one of the few industries where image can be a factor, right? You cast for people based off of image. You like you put things out like casting calls or create roles that talk about people's identities and things like that. So, where that is where you don't have that in any other, industry really. So because that's a factor, there's different kinds of challenges that I think that we, experience in entertainment. But so, as you were saying a little bit earlier, Mike, there are certain types of representation, and I think it's getting better and better, as we kind of like discussed a little bit before, before our call started. Um, but it's not just about visibility or having people on, on screen. It's also about, what roles are they portraying, right? There's all these like stereotypes that have been created and these roles that people tend to understand or quote unquote believe that they understand about individuals, about particular groups and things like that. But so the quality of the role that's actually being put on screen is incredibly important, as well, in addition to just, being on screen. We can
And
talk. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, well, I just wanted to jump in, yeah, because I think, yeah, it's from, again, kind of going to the media conversation, right? That we've been having, and little by little, I think the fans have really kind of led a lot of these discussions over the last few years,
Absolutely.
about, well, why is this person being cast in a role that's representative of a completely different race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever, right? And so you have that, but yeah, to your point, like how often have the villains always been a person of color?
Exactly.
And it's,
Exactly.
yeah, like that. It's that kind of stuff, and you're right. Like it's the media controlling that. It's like what we see. That's what we're supposed to believe, and you get a lot of tokenism, which we see
Hmm.
in companies, right? When you hire a token person of color to check your diversity box,
Hmm.
like it's just. So I'm glad. I love this conversation. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just.
No, no, no worries. Like I love the feedback. Come on, like we can jump in and out as much as possible. So, but to continue a little bit with that story is like basically like the value of like the role itself and what it is that people are portraying. Is it reinforcing stereotypes? Is it adding new ones? Is it always shining people like you were saying, UV, to like in a negative light, right? And it's like we can also think about this from like if we're talking about people with disabilities, right? The way that people are portrayed impacts how people are treated in real life. So people used to love to say like, oh, it's just movies, or oh, it's just TV, or oh, it's just, like whatever, to kind of like lessen it. But I think what people forget is that humans are really like, we are wired for storytelling. We are wired for storytelling since the beginning of time, like sitting around a fire, in caves, drawing pictures to try to communicate to each other what the world looks like and how you fit into it. We
Exactly.
establish
Wow.
that by story.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, that is I really really I love that, and people will ping me on like, hey, did you see so and so about and this kind of drives me nuts. But to your point, I get it why it drives me nuts now, Jimmy, is just somebody reach out like, oh, did you hear this blind person who just ran across America, or like did the Forrest Gump, or
Hmm.
like or just climbed this mountain or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, like I celebrate anybody who's got the physical chops to be able to do something like that. But in what I'm doing, I feel like really fits within what you're doing too, because so my role is to help organizations help, I don't know, the everyday blind person who's motivated and educated, but maybe doesn't have the physical prowess or the funding to
Right.
be able to climb a mountain or run across the country, that sort of thing. So, the everyday blind person who just, went to school, has some education, but truly just, wants to be able to like earn their own nickel.
Hmm.
Right. So, and you do that through, organizations truly, embracing inclusion, and not just in so So that storytelling of, what people with disabilities or people of color, like, I totally, like, that totally clicked with me when you said that, Jimmy. Like, I never, and how that affects so many things. Like when somebody says, "Oh, did you hear about this blind person who just did?" I'm like, no, that's not relevant to getting people jobs, like, so.
Exactly. And it's like, we do this thing, of presuming capability or presuming people's like abilities when we don't know exactly, if we're not interacting with a person from a particular group, if we don't know like from personal experience, we tend to only have like singular stories, and those stories tend to be what we have remembered from the media. If I've never interacted with a blind person, or a person who's hearing impaired, or a person with any kind of like disability, there's going to be presumptions that I've either had from like the news, or that one movie that I really like that I saw, or this TV show, or whatever it is. And I'm going to superimpose that on the individual. So when we look at it like that, singular stories, when there's only a singular narrative about a group of people, it can actually kind of become dangerous. Because if you're fighting for rights in like the government, if you're fighting for access, or if businesses are assuming that people aren't able to do certain things that they actually are quite capable of doing, because we've presumed what their capabilities are based off of the stories that we've kind of sat in our minds and in the back of our minds, it's like that impacts decisions. It impacts the way that like that we move throughout the day. So it's like storytelling is all about frame of reference, and increased frame of reference increases our capacity for empathy, and for being able to like basically put ourselves in other people's shoes and try to experience or understand the unique experiences that these individuals have, right?
And it's also been weaponized.
It has also been weaponized.
Politicians, the media. I mean, that's the issue. And so, I think the work that Mike's doing, that we're trying to do, and that you're trying to do, I believe at Company 3, like in the editing process, right? It is how do we, how do we help people, really get all sides of it, right?
Hmm.
And how do we really portray people for their actual abilities, instead of
Correct.
assuming, like in the interview process, we assume all day long just by looking at someone's name
Exactly.
if they can do the job or not. And in reality, that's ridiculous, right? Or by a handshake. We've had so many hiring managers who are like, "Oh, I know at the handshake if I'm going to hire them or not." How is that even relevant to the job? Like, it's crazy.
Exactly. And it's those types of assumptions, that we end up making, that implicit bias, that kind of comes into play, that can impact decisions. And so this is all the reason why, like, because I think both of what Mike, you and you guys are doing is trying to actually increase frame of reference. It's educating people and letting people know that these are the things that are at play when you're making decisions. These are the things that people are actually like able to do. These are some of the things that are necessary, or businesses need to also take into consideration in order to make a workplace more inclusive, for all types of people of varied identities and experiences, right? And so in the entertainment industry, I would say, just to kind of like round that discussion like out, I think that's part of what goes on like in front of the scenes, which is why there's often so much pushback when people are casting people that don't belong to those groups.
Yeah.
It is because a lot of times it carries with it, from the decision makers, the assessment that good enough is good enough,
Yeah.
or close enough is good enough.
Yeah.
And it's like that inherently, like is a problem. And then it's all about the authenticity of that experience, because there's so little representation of like quite a variety of different groups, and the excuses for the longest had always been, oh, well, it changes the story if we turn this person, like into that person. So, well, they can't play that. Well, then it's like, well, when you start having stories that are about that person, why wouldn't you let that person play that role then? Like, what's the excuse
Yeah.
now?
Right.
Right? And
Oh
then
man.
to like to compound that, the people on the like when you get to behind the scenes, it's even less, like diversity. And the problem, like with that is a lot of times the people are behind the scenes are the ones that are making the decisions of what shows up on in front of the scene.
Honestly.
Yep.
Well, and I was just going to
Oh my
say,
gosh.
like
Wow.
your role, so company three, I mean, post production, the work that you're doing. So you're leading D&I, DE&I there.
Mhm.
What was your conversation going in? Like, what was your like? Listen, this is how we have to do this.
It was a pretty direct conversation. I'll say that. But to my now employers, like I guess to celebrate them a bit, is they weren't daunted by it by any means, and they were very much so on board and were like, yes, let's do this. But I often liken what I do. Well, actually, this is how I'll say it. So I talk about our habits or our behaviors, so the behaviors that we've had in hiring, and I think this will resonate to like with you, UB, because of Interview IA, is like we've got things that we've been doing for so long. Just because it's the way that it's been established that it's traditionally done. This is the hiring process. This is what a job description looks like. This is, and it's been quote unquote effective in the like by meaning that like we were able to hire people, we were able to find people, and companies were successful, right? But now that definition has to expand to be like not just hiring people, but it's like, who are we hiring, and is there a barrier against other people? Are people feeling welcomed and utilized properly, right? So what I told them, I said, so what we have to understand is that we've had a long time to build these behaviors. And so they're no longer behaviors, they're actually habits. And what do you do when you need to break a habit? If you can afford it, you hire a personal trainer. That would be me. So I was like, I'm not here to fix anything if they're assuming that there is anything that needs to be fixed, but that's not what my role is. I don't fix things. What I do is, like a personal trainer, I will bring expertise, recommendations, and accountability, but the body is the one that's going to have to do the heavy lifting. This is the group that's going to have to, run the laps, be sore, not be, excited about it every day, going to be stretched in ways that, we're not necessarily used to being stretched, but we're building muscle. And I'm like, and if you stick with the plan, I promise you're going to come out on the other end more agile, healthier, stronger, and far more resilient as a result.
I so love the analogy. I like all of that, Jimmy. Like just um man, I so like, and it's so practical. Like this that will like so this so obviously super like you're super strategic on just going to organizations who are literally willing to take on the work themselves. Like
Hmm.
that's the business model, right?
Hmm.
So talk to me about, okay, like who comes to you, who, like in, because you're super, you and your organization are super focused on the entertainment industry. Like are you able to share like who you are working with, or is that proprietary?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of it is pretty like open. Mostly it's just basically, throw a stone at any movie or television show and we're probably working with them.
No
Right.
kidding.
Yeah,
Wow.
because I think, we're, if not the largest, one of the largest that do what we do. So because we do like visual effects, so we're part of major, productions left and right. And we also do like traditional post-production. We do 3D conversion, from 2D to 3D. We actually do, like animation work. So I mean, they're very few films and our TV shows that we haven't touched at some point in time in its life cycle.
That's super cool. Okay, so then like from that inclusion lens that you're talking about, I got to ask then, like I know there's more of this now, but it's when we start talking about very very little representation, and if it is, like, what kind of light does it shed on like the larger actor community of disabilities?
Hmm.
How, like, what exposure have you had to that world, with this work that you're doing right now, Jimmy?
Well, it's interesting because with I wouldn't say directly with the work that that I'm doing, even though we are definitely making pushes toward becoming a place that is as open and inclusive in like in our hiring practices. We've definitely made partnerships with organizations. One that I'd love to shout out is a company called Exceptional Minds that's here based in Los Angeles, which actually does um, occupational, training for individuals on the autism spectrum, and they're, focused on like the type of work that, like that we do in post production. So just, going frame by frame and, cleaning up, digital noise that might be on on a specific frame, or, some animation things, and it's really, really amazing. But go ahead.
Huh. No, that's cool. I hadn't heard that's so I've heard of the spectrum folks being used for very specific roles in organizations before. And I love knowing that the entertainment industry is using their amazing abilities for very specific skills as well.
Like, absolutely. And and so we work with them, one, to just make sure that we're as informed and knowledgeable as we can possibly be, as far as like, becoming potential like employers. Actually, I think a news story just ran that one of the executives at our organization basically, and with the organization approval, also we sponsored an individual and gave them a scholarship to, to the Exceptional Minds program, to continue their study, right, and to learn to do more of this kind of like post-production work. So that has always been very, very exciting. In my personal, life, just before, I think I'd spent maybe 5 years on the board of directors of the Down Syndrome Association of Los Angeles. And in that, capacity, I did quite a bit of, got a lot of exposure and a lot of, working with actors, with Down syndrome, and, connecting them with, my contacts over at like CBS, or working with, different agencies that maybe had a focus on individuals on the autism, or not even autism spectrum, but with different disabilities, actually, like all kinds. And making sure that, we're fighting that fight of talking about accurate representation, and, and having people that people can, kind of see or view as representatives of like of their real life stories, right? So it's been, really like amazing, and it has definitely come leaps and bounds, but there's so much more to go, because we've just got so many assumptions and stereotypes about people, and then there's just assumption that like, oh, I didn't even know that that a person with this diagnosis could be capable of doing these types of things. And
Well,
it's like, that's why it's so important to
oh,
have
yeah.
this told.
I mean, I just love it. Like, and you see it more and more now with like Ava DuVernay and Tyler Perry taking the reins, right? And sort of
Yes.
they're creating their own studios to do this themselves. And but you're also seeing sort of this, like I remember American Horror Story and even Star Trek Discovery. You
Mhm.
know, they're casting people, whether they have Down syndrome, whether they have ALS, but they're casting them regardless. It doesn't, like, you know what I mean? And it's not
Yeah.
the character, it's they're not casting them because of,
Yeah.
you know,
Ryan
it's
Murphy,
casting.
Ryan Murphy, who's the executive producer of American Horror Story, the creator of the show, he's
Yeah.
actually done an amazing job, from, from Glee to American Horror Story to just, having a ton of different like just forms of representation like in his programs. And I love that you mentioned American Horror Story, because Jamie Brewer, who is an actress with Down syndrome,
Yeah.
is like a very good friend of mine who
Oh, you're kidding.
yeah, no, she's an amazing person and like a huge advocate, and has served on boards and has done all of this, like work with eliminating the R word from people's,
Yeah.
vocabularies, and like she's a dynamic speaker, and I just think about like I love that her family has always been so supportive and like followed through, because I'm like, man, if anybody actually tried to limit Jamie, like it would have been such like it would have just been such the wrong thing to
Right,
do,
right.
because what she's been able to accomplish is amazing. It's like, I mean,
Mm,
she's impacted so many
Yeah.
people. It's crazy.
Well, and she's never played
love.
a character like the character description is not, I don't think, is, person with Down syndrome.
I think only in one season
Yeah.
was the like, was there a diagnosis like associated with her role? Otherwise, it's just Jamie.
It's just Jamie. And
Uh, that's so cool. All
yeah.
right,
So
Jimmy, I want to switch stories a little bit with you on kind of, because where you grew up, where you came from, has influenced you and your role today, and kind of how you the conversation with one to one to one to many. And I think
Mhm.
it's really important for our audience members to kind of hear a bit more. So I want to switch gears a little bit on you, if that's all right, and just again, where we come from has influences on what we do today. And I think this is great for the audience to hear, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. No, and I agree. I definitely think that your background and where you come from and where you grew up, like all definitely have an impact on who we become as people. So I, I'm from St. Louis, but and particularly from a town called Ferguson, which people, may be mostly familiar with now because it was basically like the epicenter of how the conversation around race and justice basically shifted, like in late 2014 with the, murder of Michael Brown and the demonstrations that resulted within the community, like basically as a result of that. Right. And so like I won't like misrepresent Ferguson and say like there was constant racial tension at all times, because it like that wasn't the case. But being a Black man growing up there, I was always aware of race. Right. It was always an element that I need to make sure that, kind of like I understood, because it was one of those things where it's like, if you get pulled over by a police officer or, this or that, you got to be careful. You need to understand this. This is the way you respond, all of that. So that was very much so part of my experience and my existence. At the time, I believe like Ferguson was, when I was growing up there, it was predominantly white. And, not a ton of diversity as we, think about like ethnic diversity just in St. Louis in general at the time. It was very much so like you had, if it was, kind of an equal number of white and Black people, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's really diverse, right? Because like that's kind of how like the limit was. But during that time, I'd already lived, like I'd already left and moved to like Los Angeles, when Michael Brown was killed. But, like I went back, I did some talks, at like my old school, other places of just, trying to give, people some kind of like inspiration and how to navigate and do all of these types of things while the conversation had gotten so heated and big and extreme. And it was a really difficult time in the sense of there were people that, I had been friends with for over 20 years that just really could not wrap their minds around like what the community was talking about, why we were saying that this is so difficult, why we were talking about our experiences in this way, because they'd not seen it that way. There were people that that I'd been friends with for so long that I was just like trying to communicate with them. And they're like, Jimmy, this wasn't your experience. We had the same experience. I was like, no, no, we didn't. They're like, well, you never said anything then. And I was like, well, you don't believe me now. Right. So it's like, even now, with all of this and everybody else saying things, you don't believe me now. So how is it that, do you think that as a kid, I was going to be able to, to hold that flag and say, hey, there's a problem here. You like, no, that wasn't a thing. I had to survive, and be in survival mode, and always be the quote unquote safe Black guy that everybody got to just be like, oh, he's friendly, he's non-threatening, all of that. That definitely shaped, kind of like my experience and how I spoke about things. And it got to the point, truthfully, after a while, that I was just like, I am exhausted with having to explain my right to live. I am exhausted with trying to justify my experience, right? And or my existence as a matter of fact. And so like I ended up divorcing quite a few friends, at the time because I was just like, I can't. And then I ended up in a pretty significant depression, early the next year in 2015. And I really had to take a step back. I wasn't responding to people on social media. I kind of just ghosted like everybody just because I was in such a dark and and sad place because it's just like people just don't get it, right? And then I'd ended up having a talk with a friend and mentor of mine, and who's just a really amazing guy, Don Foster, who's a writer, and he was my former boss. He's on Two and a Half Men and Big Bang Theory and Mike and Molly. But we were sitting in his in his basement, like his of his house one day, and he was just like, Jimmy, he's like, how you doing, man? And I was like, I'm doing all right. I'm like, he's like, I know you're really pushing, you're really doing a lot of things. He's like, I just want you to know though that you don't have to convince everybody. You just need to convince enough. And it was just like, huh.
Yeah.
And I had this like sigh of kind of like relief because he's like I know like the weight of the world is on your shoulders right now. And he's like and he's like and I understand why you feel like it needs to be. He's like but I just want to encourage you. He's like you're impacting me, you're impacting so many people, but know that not you don't have to engage in every discussion because you got to take care of you too, right? And it was kind of like in that moment that I realized I was like, whoa, I really do have to take care of myself. And I realized that like my skill set really lent itself to a more of a one to many type of format where like either like on podcasts like this where we're talking about it, or if we in speaking engagements, or doing it like in the professional space where I'm helping a large group of employees, as opposed to the individual one-on-one conversations. There are other people that's their skill set, and I'm like, we got to divide and conquer. I let people do that, but I can't do all of the things. And I needed to recognize that I needed to budget my energy because I don't have endless amounts of energy. And me engaging in every individual conversation was taking the energy that I had for the things that were uniquely mine, or that I needed to be able to do because of my background experience and an ability to put it into words.
There's the mic drop. That's it.
That
Done. That I
that
mean,
is so powerful.
yeah. I mean, that's exactly. We love that philosophy because I think you're exactly right. And one of the reasons we wanted to start this podcast was to bring all these different voices who are trying to do this work so we can learn from each other, realizing that it's going to take all of us, right? It's not resting on the shoulders of one person or a few to get this work done because you can't. To your point, and that's why it ties so nicely to kind of the personal trainer analogy you used, is that you have to take care of yourself.
Mhm.
God, I love it.
I
Really
do
do.
too. No, Jimmy, what a pleasure. I look forward to the day that we're able to travel and meet up for coffee again. But we I when Choose Inclusion does a road trip, we'd love to come out to LA, and if you would honor us with a cup of coffee, we'd love it.
I'm
So
in. I'm in. No question.
awesome. Well, good. And what a true pleasure. I've so enjoyed this. I could talk to you for another hour, and I know we're not able to. But man, I so many unique things that you brought up today, Jimmy, that quite honestly, like we've talked to a few people on our podcast, and yet the wisdom that you were able to share today was just this podcast is chock full. I hope our audience members go back and listen to this a time or two, because so much great information here. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me. I've equally enjoyed this discussion, so I really appreciate it.
No, thanks, man. It was so great to hear your voice again. And yeah, let's keep in contact and figure out how we can help each other, and just keep moving forward.
100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you, audience, as always, for tuning in. Chooseinclusion.com is the place to go to get to all the different streaming sites and to listen in. So thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.